Investigators need to know how one of the world's most successful planes, on one of the world's most traveled routes, simply fell out of the sky. Investigators now must turn their attention to finding out what caused that breakup. The search for survivors goes on around the clock. There were 225 people on the airplane. Nobody is found alive. The bodies are taken to the Penghu Islands to be identified and examined. Wreckage that's found floating is also brought to the Penghu Islands. Sophisticated ground-based radar tracked Flight 611 throughout its short journey. The radar tracked the plane as it climbed on course to 35,000 feet. Then suddenly, Flight 611's signal split apart. 3 weeks after the crash, the Yan Steed, a sophisticated salvage vessel, arrives in the Taiwan Strait. It's equipped with divers, a diving chamber, and a remote-operated submarine, complete with sonar and video cameras. Using sonar, investigators have located the wreckage of Flight 611 deep underwater. Clint Cruikshanks knows all the pieces that make up a 747, but he's never seen them like this. Cruikshank's job is to help the Taiwanese identify specific airplane parts among the wreckage. Once a piece is identified, its GPS coordinates get recorded. The GPS mapping tells investigators that the debris is spread out over 325 square kilometers. It will be difficult to track down specific pieces of the plane. 25 days after the crash of Flight 611, the plane's 2 black boxes have been found. One contains voice recordings of conversations in the cockpit. The other, data from the plane's flight computer. Investigators begin with the plane's cockpit voice recorder. They hope that the pilots will have said something to each other about an emergency on board. The recording begins about 10 minutes before the plane took off. Preparations for the flight sound normal. The crew checks all their systems and runs through standard checklists. Investigators listen to more than conversations. They also want to hear if the plane itself was making any unusual sounds. If anything, though, this cockpit is unusually quiet. The captain seems relaxed. The microphones pick up the sound of controllers talking to other planes. In the moments before the disaster, nothing seems wrong. There are no unusual sounds. The final words spoken in the cockpit are from Captain Yi Ching-fung. He calls out the distance to their cruising altitude. That's followed by the sound of a chime, alerting the crew that they're nearing 35,000 feet. And then the cockpit microphone picks up the sound of the plane breaking apart. Half a second later, the recording stops. After the disappointment of the voice recorder, studying the wreckage becomes the only option for investigators. They focus their efforts on items that can either prove or disprove the link to TWA Flight 800. The analysis is based on a simple fact. The pieces that came off the plane first would be the first to hit the water. If investigators can figure out which pieces those were, they'll know where the trouble began. As they're brought to the dock, every single piece of wreckage has been logged and numbered for identification. K. Young selects 18 pieces of wreckage for the computer analysis. Some from the front, some from the middle, and some from the back of the plane. Along with all the other data, he'll feed information about each item's weight and shape into the computer. Based on where the pieces fell, the computer should be able to calculate which of those 18 pieces was the first to come off the plane. All of the data paints a telling picture of what happened at 35,000 feet. K. Young gets to see how Flight 611 broke up, from beginning to end.
The tail came off first.
Along with the dado panels, it's a very important clue. Investigators are now keen to recover items from the rear of the plane. The NTSB sends metallurgist Frank Zakar to Taiwan to examine the wreckage. With this battered piece of metal, investigators have struck gold. Item number 640 would give investigators a revealing glimpse into the past and lead them to conclude that the crash of Flight 611 actually began 22 years earlier. The massive piece of fuselage that has caught Frank Zakar's attention is exactly what investigators have been searching for. It includes a piece of the belly, the sidewall, and the rear cargo door. It's from the back of the plane, precisely where the analysis told them the breakup had begun. The way most of the metal is torn suggests it ripped apart violently in midair. When metal breaks due to overload or overstress, it comes apart at an angle. But the fractured edges of piece number 640 aren't angled, they're flat. Fatigue fractures happen when metal is stressed repeatedly over time until it breaks. It looks very different from a stress fracture. That's exactly the kind of crack that investigators observe on piece number 640. That tells them it didn't break off the plane suddenly as it fell from the sky. This piece separated from the plane over time. Had it caused the deaths of 225 people? There's something else about this piece that stands out. It has a metal patch on it. It's called a doubler plate. It's the equivalent of a patch on a punctured tire. It's not unusual to find numerous doubler plates on older planes like this one. At some point, this section of the 747 had been repaired. Investigators need to know why it was fixed and how that was done. When this plane was only 6 months old,
Speed is low, sir. Watch it.
its tail scraped the runway while landing.
Did you feel that?
It happens when a plane lands or takes off at too steep an angle. It's called a tail strike. Tail strike damage is routinely repaired. Investigators want to know how China Airlines went about fixing the plane. They can only find a brief mention of the repairs that were done in the plane's logbook. There's not a lot of detail in China Airlines records. The documents that do exist show that the day after the tail strike, China Airlines did a temporary repair. Workers attached a large aluminium plate over the damaged area. A more permanent repair was to be carried out within 4 months. According to the manual, many of the scratches on the plane were too deep to be repaired. The entire damaged section should have been cut out and replaced. 22 years later, investigators can tell that for some reason the damaged piece was not replaced. The scratches from the tail strike are still there. China Airlines engineers tell investigators that the scratched area was too large to cut out, so they sanded the scratches down instead. The scratches weren't sanded down or cut out. They're still there. Even though the repair wasn't done according to Boeing's instructions, the way it was logged made it seem like it was. So for 22 years, anyone reading that entry would assume the damaged area had been cut out as it should have been. By covering an improper repair with a doubler, and then documenting the repair as meeting Boeing's standard, the workers made their mistake impossible to detect. And every time the plane took off over the next 20 years, the concealed problem got worse and worse. The air inside a commercial airplane is pressurized as the plane climbs. Air is forced into the cabin to keep the pressure inside the plane greater than the pressure outside. It's like inflating a tire. The inside air pushes against the plane's skin. The plane's skin expanded and contracted a little bit every time. Because they weren't properly repaired, the cracks grew and spread. Eventually, the crack grew into a stunning 2.3 meters. A small scratch had grown into an enormous problem. Then, in May 2002, as Flight 611 climbed, that problem killed 225 people. The plane went into a steep dive. The force of the air on what was left of the plane quickly ripped it to pieces.